St. Augustine. What day is today?
Wednesday.
It's Wednesday. Have no clue what date it is, but we are going to move the boat right over there. Hi, we're Mark and Mel. After raising 4 amazing daughters who are now raising our 12 grandchildren and helping people on land in the real estate business for over 30 years, we're now realizing our goal of a year-long adventure cruising America's Great Loop on our boat Paradise. This is a 6,000-mile journey through waterways that include the Atlantic and Gulf Intercoastal Waterways, Great Lakes, Canadian Heritage Canals, and inland rivers of America's Midwest cities. Join us as we navigate over 100 locks, explore cities large and small, and experience an unforgettable journey through America's Great Loop. So what's the plan?
We are going to leave the mooring field, and move over to the marina, which is right there.
And why is that?
Because we are getting a delivery of some large heavy stuff, which we can tell people about later.
Okay.
And it's going to be easier to do it there, especially since there's some rain in the forecast later today as well.
Yeah. So that'll be good. If it gets rainy and windy, it's a good time to be in and get some packages from our friend. We're going to put them on the boat, then we'll come back on the mooring ball when it clears up. It's supposed to be nice the rest of the week, but we're going to go tour the city with our friends, our friend June, who used to live in Arizona, and she lives here now, so she's going to share all about the town, and we'll take a tour.
So nobody's been to St. Augustine before, so
Nope.
You're going to get a little bit of a history of St. Augustine and a little bit of history of Florida. As
Awesome.
we're riding around. So
Exciting.
looks like we're just going to beat the rain.
Yeah.
It's supposed to come in about 2:30. I just looked at the radar, and so we're
Perfect timing.
Yeah, perfect timing.
We usually do about 90 minutes, but I always try to push it a little bit more when I got June on board here. Hopefully I can tell her something that she doesn't already know.
Yeah.
So,
I have retained a lot.
well, that's what we're going to do today. Is we're going to try to give her some new information.
Yay.
We didn't come into St. Augustine. We were probably about 30 miles north of here, 35 miles north of here. We came into the corner just northwest of Jacksonville, and that would be the St. Mary's River, and that's the dividing line between Georgia and Florida. Well, in 1795, when we came across, that was the dividing line between pretty much the new United States and Spanish Florida. At the end of the 7-Year War, what happened is they made an agreement. The Spanish would get Cuba back, and the British would get Florida. They wanted it desperately because that's the only thing they did not have in the continental North America on the East Coast that didn't belong to the British. So what happens is they finally get it. And what do they do with it? They cut it in half. And what they do is they create Colony 15 and 14. Pensacola was the capital of Colony 15, St. Augustine the Colony 14. We always hear about the 13 colonies. We never hear about Colony 14 and 15. But there's a good reason for it. The reason for it is because 14 and 15 here in Florida, we wanted nothing to do with what was happening in the 13 other colonies. We were quite fine being part of the British Empire because after hundreds of years of being poor, this colony was wealthy now. And the reason it was wealthy is because what the British had done in the Caribbean. They had went into the Caribbean. If you've ever visited St. John and seen the islands and seen what the British did there, they pretty much cut everything down to grow sugar cane. They didn't have any food. They didn't have any meat, any cattle. Where was it all coming from? Florida. We were the breadbasket of the Caribbean, and that's why we were wealthy. So the people here, what we did here during the Revolutionary War is we kept prisoners in our plaza, so that time period lasted only 20 years for the British. By 1784, the United States had done what it did. The Spanish had actually came in the back door. I call that the Gulf. And they went into the Gulf and actually taken Pensacola and eventually all the rest of western Florida with the help of the United States. The war is over, independence is here, and the United States says, we don't want this. Florida's all yours, and gave it back to Spain. And they were here for 41 years. They thought Florida was a wasteland. But at the end of 41 years, the United States government realized they have made a mistake. And what do? They go to the Spanish and said, listen, you owe the French $5 million. We'll pay that $5 million for you. That's a lot of money then.
Yeah.
We'll pay that $5 million for you. Well, if you don't want to do it that way, we have another way we'll do it. And how is that? We'll just take it. And so, and so the Spanish said, okay, pay that debt.
Yeah.
And that's how we got it. So in 1818, we made an agreement with the Spanish that we would get Florida, and by 1821 we were officially a territory of the United States, and the new United States people were coming to St. Augustine. By 1845 we were the 27th state. Okay, so we covered the time periods. We covered the fact that the city was burnt down 3 times by 1702, but one thing that we left out, and that was after James Moore burnt the city for the third time. What we did, we had that fort. It worked pretty good, but we needed something else to keep those people out of the rest of the city. So we built a 14-foot high wall all the way around the city. We built it out of an earthen embankment. By 1800, it was made out of these palm trees like this, cut down and stacked like this all the way around the city. Not just the original city, which was 20 city blocks. They added another 20 city blocks, and it enclosed 40 city blocks all total by that time period. After that, never again. We were never burnt down. We were sieged by Oglethorpe in 1740, but he couldn't even get off the island. He just bombarded us, and that didn't work very well for him. So after that, we were never burnt down again. So,
That's amazing.
all right. So
Amazing.
that's your base history.
Cool.
And so when they founded the Fountain of Youth there, they didn't realize that they were sitting in the middle of what was the Timucuan Indian village. So that is where the Spanish landed. The Timucuan Indians said, you gotta leave. And so what they did is they ran them off, and they ended up over on Anastasia Island for 7 years. Well, when they were on Anastasia Island, they found something over there. They were digging a hole or digging a pit, something, and they found this stone. And this stone is called coquina. And for 100 years, they asked the people in Spain and in Mexico, New Spain, and said, we found this stone, can we build a fort out of it? It's too labor intensive. They kept saying no. But after, when it was burnt down, the city, for the second time, they said, okay, go ahead. And they sent us money, they sent us engineers, and we started quarrying that stone. At one point in time, we had 9 quarries on that island. Now, we'll talk a little bit more about the quarrying in just a minute, but this is a coquina structure. When you see a structure like this that's built out of coquina, it's going to be nice, smooth, it's going to be covered. A lot of it's going to look like it's nice big pieces of blocks of stone. It's not. This is plaster. They would plaster over the outside of it. Most of the time they would whitewash it. But this is what coquina looks like.
This is it.
This is not a man-made stone. It's not mixed by hand like concrete. This was like this. Eons ago, the ocean went out, never came back in, left this long line of shell right along the edge of the water, sand piled up on top of it. And you know, a million years ago, we always talk about acid rain, and we think that's a modern thing, you know. Acid rain's been around for a long time. You think about all those volcanoes that were out, putting all that smoke out. Well, what happened is when this all piled up, sand piled up on top of it, dirt got on it, the acid rain starts going down through this little top layer shell. The top layer shell starts to deteriorate, and it turns into lime. And then the lime starts to flow through all the shell on the bottom. And so what you get is coquina limestone. Coquina is a Spanish word for tiny shell. And so the Spanish found this when they were over on Anastasia Island. Now what's so unique about it, as you see, it's just millions of tiny little shells. But you saw, I just rubbed my hand across it and it crumbles. Well, the layers that were on the bottom were more firmly packed like this up top. This probably came from the bottom layer. So when they started quarrying this, the only way they could quarry it is they would find that vein. And now, first of all, the vein's only probably about 500-600 yards wide, a couple of 100 miles long, but it really only comes close to the surface here in St. Johns County and Flagler County, the county below us. By the time it gets to Daytona, it's too far down to do it. But when they quarry it, they go to the edge of the quarry and they start cutting with an axe. And they go down as far as they want, they wedge it over and they drop it over. And then they start cutting again and cutting the blocks out of it. When they built the fort, for 3 years, all they did was quarry it and bring the stone across the river, stack it up where they were going to build the fort. The whole time they're doing all of that, they built a giant furnace. And what they did with that furnace was burn 14,000 years worth of Native Americans eating oysters. We had oyster shells everywhere, just mounds of them. So what they did is they burnt those oyster shell, turned into a powder, and that's quicklime. And that is how they got their mortar. They mixed it with sand and water, and that created that. They used a little bit different version of that to create their plaster that they covered over the outside of it. When they built that fort, the foundation of it, 17 feet wide. The first row of block, 13 feet thick. 30 feet up in the air, that at the top of it, it's 9 feet thick. So it was a pretty substantial piece of stone. When you go inside of the fort, you look at the fort and you see it and you say, oh, that's pretty big, and you expect to walk in to see this big giant open area. It's not like that. When you get inside, what they did is it's just a small little area. They had mounded up more dirt, and there are rooms all through the inside of that. That's where they kept their gunpowder. There were safe rooms, basically. But James Moore, this was the original core of the city in 1640. There were about 35 houses in this area, houses and businesses. And about 1,200 people stuck in this area. It is right there. That's the one. They date back to 1614.
Oh, wow.
The way they found this is in the late 80s and 90s. Especially in the 80s, our laws and our rules on preservation were not that good. So if it was an old house and you owned it and it was in really bad condition and you wanted to tear it down, there was a good possibility you could tear it down. So there was a house built here, it was built in the 1790s, and they tore it down. And when they tore it down, this was underneath the front porch.
Wow.
And it had nothing to do with the house that was built in 1790s. So they start getting into this, and what it was the coquina well that had dried up. And what happens when a well dries up? It becomes a garbage pit. And so what they found in there was the trash. And they found everything from Native American pottery to China. They found burnt wood. That's how they dated it. They found a little necklace about that big, the end of it, and it was like an upside down fist like this, and it would have hung around a baby's neck to keep the bad juju away. So that is what they found in this, and they were able to date this. And so they think that this was maybe a Jesuit priest compound right here. The house in front of you, 1763. This is called the Father Miguel O'Reilly house. We'll get into Father Miguel O'Reilly a little bit later. But when we go around the corner, this coquina wall that you see here, this section, this was a house all the way up until 1702. And what happened was it burnt down in the 1702 fire. Remember earlier I said 1-story flat roof coquina structure? That's what it would be like. Now, when the king commissioned or said, this is how you're going to lay out your city, this is how you're going to build your houses, this is what they did. As possibly close to the road as you could have. You would have a wall around your house. Didn't necessarily mean it was stone. It could be wood. But all of this was for defensive purposes because you didn't know what was going to happen. When were the pirates going to show up? When were the British going to show up? So if you wanted to get into this house, that front door would have not been there. There would have been a door a little bit further down that would have went into the garden. Once you got inside of the garden behind the wall, then there was a door to get into the house. There was no, you didn't cook inside your house. You cooked on the back porch, which was attached to the side of it. You heated your house with a charcoal brazier, flat piece of iron with a clay pot in the middle of it, and you brought in hot coals, and that's how you heated your house. The British come along, and what did they do? 1763, they add second stories to it. And what do the British do? They add all of these balconies, which is a nightmare for trucks going down these roads. That balcony right down there where the flag's at has been knocked so many times. And so that's part of that original mission site you see right there, that coquina wall. In 1763, the British came, and what did they do? They took over this mission site, they remodeled it, and they turned it into a military barracks. This has been a military post since 1763. It was the British, then the Spanish, then the U.S. Army, and then in 1906 it was turned over to the Florida Militia. The Florida Militia is now called the Florida National Guard, and this is their headquarters. And this is where the generals live at.
Yes, look at these nice houses that they taxpayers
Yeah. Now, we have to cut them a little slack, though, because the taxpayers were in 1885.
Oh my
Yes, that's
gosh.
And that's
look
when these two houses are 1885.
They're beautiful.
And then these are the two generals from the Army National Guard.
Okay.
You could tell by the insignia on both of these houses, 1885. And then
They're just private residences now?
yes, yeah, they belong to the
Beautiful.
generals.
They belong to the generals.
They belong to us.
Oh, they-
So,
Yeah.
so the local generals live there, and that's the housing for the generals today. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
This is the Army, the Air National Guard. These two houses were built in 1888. Those are 1885. These are 1888. And you can tell by that, those got wings. That's the Air National Guard.
Yeah.
Now, the building across the street is the only thing that the British built completely by themselves that's still standing. And the reason for that is because it's made out of coquina. This was the King's Bakery. There would have been a giant oven on one end, flour storage on the other end, and the bakers would have lived in the loft above. And they were pretty busy. They worked about 12 hours a day each, because there could be anywhere from 400 to 1,000 British soldiers stationed here at that time period.
Wow. parade. Easter. Gonna be right down there, downtown St. Augustine. Yay! Happy Easter! Happy Easter! Oh yeah, beautiful. How cool is that? Wow. Happy Easter! Oh! I got that on video.
Still that AAA air conditioning.
Happy Easter! Oh no, mate!
It's the largest amount of Tiffany stained glass anywhere outside of a museum. It's in that dining hall.
I think of most recently compared to the dining hall in Harry Potter. You guys have Harry Potter week here at Blackburn College with a string of candles across the top, and a lot of our teachers go dressed as professors from the movies. It's very, very fun. This fall we can get strangely, let's say $21 week, you're paying $4,000. More pastries once, $4,000.
The word of God for the people of God.